Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 30 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for recognizing me here on the floor of the House, Madam Speaker, and appreciate the privilege to address you. I came to this floor, one, to hear from Judge Carter and to listen to the presentation that he made, and the other component of it is I came here to talk about one or perhaps two subject matters. One of them is Obamacare, as one might imagine. And I'd make this point that, well, first, Madam Speaker, if it's possible that there's anybody that doesn't know why Obamacare is so bad, if they maybe haven't heard the argument in some time and they're forgetting about how bad Obamacare is, and if they're starting to hear the language about what's redeemable about Obamacare, I want to make it real clear. Nothing. There is not one single component of Obamacare that's worthy of us making any effort to do anything except to repeal it all, eradicate it all, pull it all out by the roots. I listen to some members of this Congress that will say, well, don't you want your children to be on insurance, on your insurance when they're 26? No. I raised them to grow up. I want them to take their own responsibility. If they can be elected to the United States Congress when they're 25, then I think that's a pretty good age to at least say, you were free on your own when you're, well, first you got your car keys when you were 16, your license anyway, and then you got to vote when you were 18 and choose the next leader in the free world, and you got to go out and, let me say, go into the tavern legally when you're 21, and get elected to the United States Congress when you're 25, and then they kick you off of mommy and daddy's insurance when you're 26. Somehow I think that delays the growing up process. I think that we need to have people growing up and taking personal responsibility at an early age rather than delaying that at a later age. And if the states want to have it at 26, let them have it at 26. If insurance companies want to provide for that market, let them write the policy to provide for that market. But the federal government should not stick a mandate on this that requires all health insurance policies to keep the kids on until they're 26. Now, let's just say they're a young person that gets elected to Congress, like, well, I wouldn't want to, yes, I would think that there are some members of the new class that would fit very close to that category. Would one really think that they would come in here at age 25 and transition from their parents' health insurance on over to the federal opportunity of health insurance that one can access and pay their share of the premium that comes with this job working in this Congress, and maybe never have a window where they were responsible to go out on the marketplace and buy their own health insurance? I think that's actually a bad idea, but if people want it, let them drive that through their states. Some will say that we want to have pre-existing conditions so that children cannot be denied insurance on a policy that their parents have. Well, that's a good idea, and it's one that can be sustained by demand in the marketplace, and if that doesn't do it, it can certainly be sustained by mandates within the states. But it does not require, Madam Speaker, it does not require that the federal government get involved in mandating to the states, actually mandating to everybody in America, what shall be done with insurance. And so now I've used up, I think, the two things that had some popularity in Obamacare. That's it, 26-year-old insurance and no denial of pre-existing because of pre-existing conditions to children and whose parents have a policy. But if I want to go out and buy a policy that ensures that my children could stay on it, that policy is available in the marketplace. I will say this, that before Obamacare wrecked the markets, drove out a number of health insurance companies, we had 1,300 health insurance companies in this country viable in the marketplace, competing, providing all kinds of policy varieties for customers to choose from. In fact, over 100,000 health insurance policy varieties, 1,300 companies, 100,000 policy varieties. We had plenty of competition. Obamacare has driven out competition. It's not added to it. It's driven out competition. It's made it harder. It's driven up costs of health care. The indecision and the fear of what's happening has caused the entire health care industry to be frozen in place. And now they come along and say, well, if you're not going to repeal it, can you accommodate me in some way? Perhaps some way like grant them a waiver. I'm hearing individuals say, I want my waiver. They know that there have been 1,040 waivers that have to Obamacare. Well, Madam Speaker, I know that there are people out there that are listening that maybe don't understand what that means. And here's this. Obamacare is the law of the land. It is imposed upon everyone in America. A law is to be applied to every individual in an equal fashion. I mean, we might sit in different categories. We might have Medicare that applies differently to somebody 65 than it does somebody 60 years old. But waivers to statutes, to entities, individuals and entities, from my standpoint, it's unheard of. And where that authority came from, I did not see that coming. But this administration has found out that they pushed a law that's so bad that they are granting waivers to companies, to entities, entire states like the state of Maine. And now we find out that one of the people who has taken credit for helping to write Obamacare, the gentleman from New York, who I believe is a candidate for the mayor of New York City, now is calling for a waiver for the city of New York to Obamacare. So maybe if he gets his way, that won't be 1,040, it'll be 1,041 waivers. That's appalling to think that you would sit in a strategy meeting and session and try to drive a policy that I believe is flat-out socialized medicine and argue that it's good for everybody in America because they're too ignorant to take care of their own health care, and now find out that the policy is so ignorant you want a waiver from it for the largest city in America. That's appalling to think that that would happen. 1,040 waivers. 1,040 waivers. Let me see. The IRS will enforce this, punish people with an extra penalty if they don't comply. Let me see. The easy formula, the easy form for the IRS is the 1040-EZ. And we've had 1040 waivers, 1,040 waivers. It's easy for them, Madam Speaker, but it's not going to be easy for anyone who doesn't get a waiver. And we have this thing called the Equal Protection Clause. It's in the Constitution, the 14th Amendment. Everybody's going to be protected with equal protection. Obamacare itself violates the Equal Protection Clause because it gives some American citizens a different standard than others. And I'm thinking of Florida, their Medicare Advantage, which they have an exemption from under Obamacare, even though the Cornhusker kickback was removed because actually Nebraskans rejected it, to their great credit. Floridians didn't reject their exemption so that they kept their advantage. That was an existing policy that exempted them from the wipeout of Medicare Advantage that happened to people like Iowans, for example. Equal Protection Clause? Not hardly. It's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause. It's an unconstitutional bill of Obamacare. But I forgot to tell you, Madam Speaker, all the reasons why it's bad. It cannot be afforded. It's a $2.6 trillion total outlays for the first full 10 years once it would be implemented. And it increases taxes almost to that much over that period of time. It cuts Medicare, which is going to have a huge increase from 40 million to 70 million recipients of Medicare over the next few years. That huge increase, it cuts Medicare $532 billion. It purports to reform Medicare. Well, this cut we know has got to actually happen. It just simply calculates it into the CBO score. Obamacare cannot be, we can't afford it. It's unsustainable, therefore. It will reduce the research and development. It will increase lines and delays, and it will ration care, and it'll take that care out of the cost of many people and put it on a mandate that will force more into Medicaid. And there will be companies that will be forced off of the coverage they now provide for their employees and force those people onto a program that's federally subsidized, where there is there's a fund that will fund their health insurance premiums, which is also unaffordable. All these things are bad. There's so many bad things about Obamacare that I don't think there's any one person in the country that could stand up in 30 minutes and list all the bad things about Obamacare. It boils down, though, to this. It's unaffordable, it's unsustainable, it reduces research and development, it reduces the quality, it lengthens the lines, it delays the service, it rations the care. It takes away one more thing. The most important thing about Obamacare is this. I believe it is an unconstitutional takings of American liberty. It's unconstitutional in a number of ways, 3 or 4 ways at least. And American liberty is something that is precious And to think that the federal government would step in and commandeer, usurp the God-given liberty and right that we have to manage our own health care and turn it into a ration service according to formula that only government would decide who would get what service and when, and who would be on the waiting list for surgery and who would be on the waiting list to die without surgery. That is a result of Obamacare. It cannot be argued or refuted. If they put you on a waiting list for a hip replacement, or they put you on a waiting list to die without, that's one of the things that happens. They don't seem to think that's what they're doing willfully. And I don't accuse them of willfully wanting to do that. It's a consequence of the thick-skulled action of people who believe that there is a socialist model to produce their version of utopia rather than the individual dynamics that come from people that have free choices. But we're a vigorous people, Madam Speaker. We're a unique people. We're the kind of people that recognize from the beginning that our rights come from God. We're endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that pursuit of happiness wasn't the pursuit of hedonism. It was the pursuit of perfection, just the pursuit of perfection, both the intellectual and physical improvements. That's the pursuit of happiness in the Greek form, and that's what our founding fathers understood. We're a unique, vigorous people with rights that come from God, and of all of the things that flow through with this, these rights, many of them laid out in our Bill of Rights: freedom of speech, religion, and the press, freedom to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances, the freedom to the right to keep and bear arms, the right to keep and bear arms, the property rights that are in the Fifth Amendment, the right to protection of trial by jury, to be tried by a jury of your peers, and the right of protection against double jeopardy, the rights that come from that are endowed to the states and then the people respectively in the Ninth and mostly the 10th Amendment. All of that are unique things to Americans, and they don't apply to Western European democratic socialist states, or should I say social democratic states. They don't apply to people in Canada. They don't have that same level of rights. They don't apply to people in Mexico or any place else in this hemisphere, or any place else on this planet. These rights, as understood and envisioned by our founding fathers, apply only to Americans. And they are the foundation. They're the foundation of why Americans are a unique and vigorous people. And they're the foundation of why we are the unchallenged greatest nation in the world. And we have a unique vigor. And that vigor comes from the foundation of these rights. But, Madam Speaker, I would take the position that you could take all of these rights that we have, that we identify as coming from our Creator, from God, and you can bestow them upon any other people on the planet and ask them to go out and build a vigorous society that would match and mirror that of America. And I will submit that that effort would fail. It would fail no matter if they had unlimited natural resources, if they had free enterprise to no end, if they had a reverence for the Constitution the way we do. You could take this package, this vision of American rights and Constitution, you could put it in the richest land in the world, or the poorest, and offer it to any peoples on the planet. And I will submit that they could not succeed in producing another country that has the vigor and the success that this country has. And I'm not standing here, Madam Speaker, taking credit for this. I'm standing here giving reverence to this gift that we have that is America. And I will continue that of all of the rights that are the foundations of those beautiful marble pillars of American exceptionalism, and the free enterprise component that goes along with it, the property rights, freedom of speech, religion, and the press, and the list goes on. There's one other component that no other nation can have. Excuse me. Excuse me. There's one other component that no other nation can have, and that is the unique vigor of the American people. And we are a people that have been blessed by the vigor of every contributing every donor civilization on the planet, no matter the country. The people that came here, the legal immigrants that came to the United States, came here with the vision of the American dream. They were attracted to the vision of the American dream, and so we were able to, by good sense of circumstance and forethought and vision, skim the cream of the crop off of every donor civilization on the planet. The people that had a vision, that had a dream, that had ambition, that wanted to test themselves, that wanted to build something that went beyond their generation, people that wanted to leave the world a better place than it was when they found it, people that wanted to prepare the ground for the next generation to farm, so to speak, and in some cases literally. These are the people that we got that came to America from every country, whether it would be England or Scotland or Wales or Poland or Germany or Italy or any of the countries on the planet, all across Asia, all across Central and South America. People that had a vision that they wanted to live free and breathe free and build something and have children and grandchildren that could benefit from their labors and their vision and their intuitiveness and their creativity and the entrepreneurial nature. They came to America. And that set up a natural filter for people to save up enough money and to get passage to come to the United States. Some of them sold themselves for as long as 7 years of labor just to pay the passage to get here. That's a dream. You don't get any calls that come like that. You get people that are vigorous. And we've attracted them, and that's the American spirit. This vigorous American spirit is totally unsuitable for a social democracy or socialism or hardcore leftist communist Marxism or any of those other utopian philosophies that many of them emerged out of the non-English speaking portion of Western Europe. And their philosophies permeated a lot of the components of the globe because they're built upon class envy, but they're not built on the truths of human nature, nor are they built upon our rights coming from God. And so here we are in this country. Fantastic that we are the recipients of such gifts. And the gifts that we have and the vigor that we have, we need to understand what it's rooted in. And it's rooted in these freedoms. And it's rooted in the filter that filtered out people that wanted to come here but didn't have quite the ambition to make it happen. It was hard to get here. And you had to have a dream to want to come here. And when you came here, we respected hard work and smart work and people that planned and invested, and they were rewarded. And we admired them and raised our children to emulate them. How many people like Donald Trump today, even though, I guess I don't have anything bad to say about Donald Trump, not here into the record, but because he's been successful, people admire him. Bill Gates, because he's been successful. Steve Jobs, they admire him because he's been successful. They've been successful because they've been entrepreneurs, they've been creative, they've worked within the free market system, they have made our lives better and improved the quality of our lives and lowered the cost of the services that we need for our quality of life to be upheld, and made those contributions and gotten rich in the process. That's the free enterprise system. And so here we are, these vigorous people, and some of the nanny state advocates here in this Congress, well, actually it was a majority of them last year, decided they wanted to impose Obamacare on us and take away our personal vigor. They wanted to take over the responsibility of managing our health care. What they finally did was, because Obamacare is right now the law of the land, they nationalized our skin and everything inside it. A government takeover of my body. The government took my body over and the body of 308 million Americans, and now they're going to tell us when we get health care, under what conditions we get health care, that we must have their health insurance policy that they prescribe for us. They've taken away our individual responsibility. They've nationalized our skin and everything inside it, and they had the audacity, and the president's fond of that word audacity. It was in the title of one of his books, The Audacity of Hope. The President of the United States had the audacity to impose a 10% tax on the outside of the skin that he nationalized inside of if you go into a tanning salon to turn yourself a little browner. That is a reach of the nanny state to impose a tax. They wanted to tax your non-diet Coke. They want to manage our lifestyles in such a way that they'll tax us if we eat fat foods, and then I presume we should get a discount if we eat healthy foods. This is the nanny state personified. Obamacare is so bad. It's bad because of all the things that I listed about the cost and the quality and the lines and the rationing and the net result of all of that, Madam Speaker. But the worst part is, it is an unconstitutional takings of American liberty. It takes from us the ability, the right, to manage our own health care, and it must go. And when that legislation was passed and signed into law, I believe the anniversary date was March 23rd of this year. I laid awake most of the night and slept a little bit and got up in the middle of the night and drafted a piece of legislation to repeal Obamacare. It was waiting at the door of the service team to be formally put into the form of a bill when they opened up that morning. Very interestingly, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota had done the same thing. And her legislation came down within 3 minutes of mine, exactly the same 40 words that said, we're going to repeal Obamacare, and as if it had never been enacted, are the last words in the bill. 40 words, repeal Obamacare, gives the names of the bill, the numbers of the bills, etc. The last line, as if it had never been enacted. Rip it out by the roots, Madam Speaker. Now, that was not necessarily unheard of, but there aren't many precedents in the history of Congress for repeal legislation to be filed, actually, well, the next day after a huge piece of legislation has been passed. But that is what we did, and we started down that path immediately, working to get signatures on the bill and building up the support to repeal Obamacare. By midsummer, we had a discharge petition. By the end of the 111th Congress, going into the election as the only part that counted, we had 173 signatures on my discharge petition. People that wanted to see Obamacare repeal come to the floor, bypass the committee process, bypass the Speaker's ability to kill a bill before it got here, bring it to the floor for a vote. 173. We needed 218. And the message that went out across America was useful in that some members of Congress that are here today will say straight up they wouldn't be here if it were not for the discharge petition, and they could challenge their opponent to sign it. And almost every Democrat refused to do so. And now there are 87 new freshman Republicans. Every single one has run on the repeal of Obamacare. As far as I know, everyone has run on the defunding of Obamacare. And I know that every single Republican in the House of Representatives voted for H.R. 2, which is the repeal of Obamacare. And I know that every single Republican in the United States Senate voted to repeal Obamacare. The language that we generated then is the language that emerged into H.R. 2. And today, every Republican and some Democrats are on record voting to repeal Obamacare. And now that didn't stop there. The strategy that I put together almost a year ago was this, that we needed to win the majority, which we did, bring the repeal of Obamacare, which we did. It didn't succeed in the United States Senate, but behind that always was, this majority here in the House of Representatives has an obligation to cut off all funding that would be used to implement or enforce Obamacare. And I've been consistent with that language all the way through last summer, into last fall, and past the election and beyond. Repealing Obamacare, then cut off the funding to Obamacare, stop the implementation of Obamacare, and stop the enforcement of it by shutting off the budget dollars, and hold this waste of money to this unconstitutional bill of Obamacare until such time as we can elect a president who will sign the repeal. The date for that to happen in my strategy is January 20th, 2013, Madam Speaker. And that's the date that the next President of the United States will be inaugurated out here on the west portico of the Capitol building. And when that President stands there and takes that oath of office, it's my vision and my dream and my commitment to work towards it. I'm going to ask him, take your oath of office with pen in hand, Mr. President-elect. And I'm going to ask you to solemnly swear to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States to the best of your ability. So help you God. And when that statement's made and it's completed and the oath of office is finished and he's formally the President of the United States, and before that new President on January 20th of 2013 shakes the hand of Chief Justice John Roberts, I want that pen in his hand to come right down to the parchment, and I want him to sign the repeal of Obamacare right there on the podium on the west portico of the Capitol, right out there, as the first act of the next President of the United States. That's my vision, that's my commitment. But until then, shutting off funding to Obamacare is a must-do. And most of America knows by now that there were $105.5 billion automatically appropriated in a deceptive way by the way the bill was drafted up in Nancy Pelosi's office, not going through committee, not had the work of the will of this Congress, but drafted up in her office and dropped on us with hardly any notice and certainly no time to inform the American people of what was in it. Automatic, unprecedented in their scope appropriations to the tune of $105.5 billion, Madam Speaker. And already it automatically appropriated in the 2010 budget, plus that's $18.6 billion, $4.95 billion in the 2011 budget, totals up to $23.6 billion already appropriated, almost all of it set aside for the purposes of implementing Obamacare. And we must have a showdown. We must face the President down. If the President demands that Obamacare be funded, what are we going to do? Say no, Mr. President, and he vetoes legislation that would otherwise fund all of government? And if President Obama does that, or if Harry Reid continues to perform as his proxy and shuts off anything that we send over that way, even though we've demonstrated our desire to keep the legitimate functions of government, all of them functioning, the President shuts it down or Harry Reid shuts it down and this government comes to a halt. Here's the irony. The irony is this. Lights would go out in federal offices around this land. Not all of them, because essential services will keep going, but lights will go out. And as the lights go out in the non-essential service federal offices, what will be going on in the other offices? Obamacare will continue, even in a government shutdown, to be implemented because there's $23.6 billion sitting in their pot to spend out of to implement Obamacare. And we could have shutdown after shutdown, and Obamacare is implemented and implemented. We must hold the line. We must stand on this principle. It is our obligation. It is unconstitutional. We take an oath to uphold the Constitution too. And that includes defending the Constitution and opposing unconstitutional legislation with every tool at our disposal. The President and the Democrats, I believe, Madam Speaker, planned to shut this government down. That's why they agreed to a continuing resolution in December that funds the government until March 4th. It was to bring this to a head. They wanted to box us into a corner and then blame Republicans for shutting the government down. Well, it's real clear. Republican leadership wants to avoid a shutdown. It's clear to me that Democrats are determined to provide a shutdown and try to blame it on Republicans. And it's clear to me that if we fund all the functions of government except Obamacare, and if the President brings about a shutdown, it won't be the House Republicans. It will be Harry Reid as proxy for the President. If that happens, what we're going to see happen here is the President of the United States could veto an appropriations bill that funds everything except Obamacare. It would be a presidential executive tantrum that he would be throwing. That tantrum that he'd be throwing would be saying this, that his signature piece of legislation, Obamacare, means more to him than all of the other legitimate functions of government combined. That's the scenario that we are in. The American people will render a verdict when that day comes, that there is that kind of a showdown, and it must come. The American people will render a verdict. They will side with us. They were not going to side with the President who has imposed Obamacare on us. 62% of Americans want it repealed. 51% intensively want to do so. Only 24% want to keep it in any kind of a vigorous way. And so, Madam Speaker, I'll say this. We have an obligation to stand and hold our ground. This showdown will come. It must come. If it doesn't, we'll be capitulating to the President in every way that he's willing to fight. I say stand our ground now. Let's have this fight now. Let's get it over with, and let's get on with the business of the 112th Congress. With that, Mr. Speaker, excuse me, Madam Speaker, I would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January